I wonder what you think of when I use the phrase between a rock and a hard place. I wonder if that's an idea you're familiar with, the concept of finding yourself stuck between two equally bad options, trying to figure out which is the lesser of the two evils, or what's the best decision we can make when both options are rubbish. Now, maybe for some of us that's a reality right now. We're maybe thinking through questions around what college should I go to? Where maybe you're facing a situation of, I hate my job, but is this the right time to take a risk on something different? Maybe it's a difficult choice about a health decision or a place to live. Maybe it's as simple as you've got 2 appointments in your diary this week and you know you cannot be in 2 places at once. Sometimes in life, we find ourselves with difficult choices to make. Now, it's easy when there's a clear preference. But what about when it's a toss-up, when there are both pros and cons to each option? Maybe though it's not been about a choice, but you've found yourself in a difficult situation. Maybe you've been on a journey and you've come to a dead end. I know that often my sat-nav takes me places there is simply no roads, and you need to try and figure out how to reverse out of a situation. Hopefully you're a better driver than I am, because it always gets worse before it gets better. Or perhaps you've gone out for a walk, maybe in the countryside. This happened to me a few months ago, where it was light when we set off, but when it was time to come home it was dark and there were no street lights. We had to figure out how to find our way back. There's no clear way, but we have to trust. We wonder what to do next, and to be honest, we mostly make it up as we go along. I wonder how often in the last 15 months our response as Christians has been to just make it up as we go, to trust that somehow God is still in control. And we've sought as individuals, as church, to be faithful to God, even when it has been difficult. God, I don't know what to do, but I trust on you. I know that somehow you are still at work. Now, in this final section of the story of Exodus, for now, we find ourselves beautifully acted out by all of us on this journey out of Egypt. Pharaoh has finally relented. He said, your people can go. So the people have set off with great singing. Freedom is here. We're off to the promised land. But it wasn't straightforward, was it? Because the promised land wasn't yet, as they left Egypt, the land of milk and honey. Instead, they were in the wilderness, in the desert, marshes, dry land. Suddenly a Red Sea. How were they to get across? What's worse, Pharaoh, although he'd said the people could go, had had a change of heart. You see, the next morning in his grief, he thought to himself after he let the Egyptians go, why would we give up all of our economy to let these people go? He sends his men to hunt the Israelites down, to kill them, to enslave them once more. God's people in the desert, led by Moses out of slavery, but not yet arriving to the promised land. Instead, this long journey into the desert, which now leads them to a sea which they have no idea how to get across. The panic, the fear is real. The Egyptians close in, the sea is too wide and too deep, and despite all they've seen the Lord do in the past weeks and months, well, doubts creep in, fear and anger. The people turn afresh on Moses. Did you just bring us out into the desert to die? Was there not enough space for our graves in Egypt? But Moses doesn't take the bait. He doesn't rise to their complaints. Instead, he has clear words for the people. Do not be afraid. Stand firm. Today, you will see the deliverance of the Lord. And in this stunning verse, I know for many people a favourite verse in the whole of the Old Testament, Exodus 14:14, the reminder that Moses says to the people, stand firm. The Lord fights for you. You need only be still. Now, to words of opposition, to anger and panic, Moses reminds God's people of the battle belonging to the Lord. He reminds them, remember how we saw that God said he would deliver us. Look, here we are out of Egypt. Moses says, watch and see what happens next. And then God has some stunning words for Moses too. Because God says to Moses, raise your staff, divide the water. Stretch out your hand, because you will pass through this sea on dry land. Now what happens is the angel of God, who'd been travelling in front of God's people, withdraws. He heads behind them to cut off the Egyptians. He makes space for God to act. And Moses responds in faith. He breathes in, he lifts up the staff, he stretches out his hand in faith. And the impossible begins to happen. The Lord drives back the sea, dry land is exposed, and somehow mysteriously the Israelites walk through to the other side. Suddenly the Egyptians want to be part of it. They put up a chase. They come into the space where it had been dry land, and God says to Moses, hold up your hands again. And as he does so, the sea falls back to its place. The Israelites are cut off, the Egyptians are cut off, no longer able to chase down the Israelites. And God's people set their feet on a land of freedom. Freedom, liberty, new starts, the passing through of waters. The impossible becomes possible, a way through when there was no way. Is there anything that our God cannot do? But Moses needed to have courage, to trust, to hope, to respond in faith, to be ready to be obedient in the face of pressure and challenges and oppositions, but also courageous enough to do as God asked him to, even when it didn't make sense. The parting of the Red Sea is one of the most famous passages in the Old Testament, isn't it? But it's not just a history lesson. It's not just a good story. It contains within it messages and important things for us to grasp as people of faith this morning. What does it mean for us to keep putting our hope and trust in a God for whom nothing is impossible? No dead end unfixable, no battle or obstacle too big. This morning I want us to just really quickly zoom in on 3 details and say, what might God want to have to say to us this morning about what it means to keep trusting? What it means for us to be still and know the battle is the Lord's. And what it means this morning for us to stretch out our hands. So firstly, you know, the whole way through as we've looked at Moses, we've so often come back to the Israelites' reaction. We saw the people of God complain when Moses first came back because the conditions of their slavery had got worse. Last week, Carol brought to life the story of the Passover with that real challenge that they had to get ready to go. They had to be ready to trust, they had to be ready to follow these strange instructions, and that they would see God deliver them. This is just days before the story we look at today. The Israelites have marched out of Egypt free from the chains of slavery. They've seen God deliver them already. And yet here at this obstacle of the Red Sea, with the Egyptians chasing them down, well, collective amnesia sets in. They've got rose-tinted glasses on. They've completely forgotten that God has led them thus far and will still lead them. They've short memories, and they've got mouths that are quick to complain. Where today are we like the Israelites? In the eye of the storm, in the ongoing battle, how are we responding? It's challenging. Do we look at the obstacles and mouth off at God? Or do we face the storm by looking up and trusting that the God who led us this far will continue to lead us through it? You know, as Carol said, we can't go over it, we can't go under it, we've got to go around it, but in life there are challenges we've got to go through. Christians, we don't get an easy pass. The promise is that God walks with us. You know, I love the verse in Psalm 23. It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thy rod and staff comfort me. My question for us this morning is, when we go through the challenges, when we go through the battles, do we trust that God continues to walk with us? Are the battles taking our attention off the ways that God is helping us? Even though I see no way through this. Even though this huge health battle that myself or one of my loved ones face, even though when I'm not sure how I'm going to make it to the end of the month, where is the finances going to come from? I'm so stressed out about exams, I don't see a way through this. Do we trust today that God is still at work? Jehovah Jireh, my Lord is the provider. Today, do we know that we stand on the solid rock of Christ, the one who never, ever lets us down? Lord, when I see no way through this situation, will I trust today that I would lift my eyes? The psalmist says, where does my help come from? It comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, the one for whom nothing is impossible. When the challenge comes, how do we respond? Moses reminds the people of God, the Lord is faithful. He is still with us. But it's tough, and I don't say that as if it's easy. We are all today, no doubt, facing some sort of challenge, questions perhaps of the future, wondering about provision, wondering about education, worried about someone's health, worried about how life has turned out, maybe disappointed and frustrated by details. So often when it's tough, we look inwards, don't we? We fret, we worry, we put our walls up, we look to our own strengths. You know, culture says to us, you don't need anyone, you can get through this on your own. We maybe roll out our favourite Christian phrases where we don't feel that we can ever say anything's wrong because maybe people would think we had lost our faith. But there's a realness in our walk with Jesus that says, this is tough, but I know you will get me through this. God, I don't need to pretend with you that this is easy. You know I'm struggling. But I come today knowing that I don't fight the battle on my own, but that I trust in you. Because although the Israelites complained to Moses, he has some simple and powerful words. He says to them, God fights for you. You need only be still. You need only realize that you cannot do this in your own strength. You need to put down your weapons of self-justification and I don't need anybody else. And instead come to trust the one who fights for you. God is not supposed to be a spectator to your struggle. Instead, he wants to come and fight on your behalf. The Lord will fight for you. Are you letting him in to the struggle? Are you tired carrying the burdens on your own? Be still, rest, stop, cry out, look up, see the deliverance of the Lord. Moses says to the Israelites, but he also encourages us today. The Lord fights for you. The battle belongs to him. Trust, look up and see the Lord deliver you. But as we wait on the Lord, as we trust our unknowns to him, we've got to live by faith. Don't miss that detail this morning. God says to Moses, raise your staff, stretch out your hand, divide the water. If I was Moses, I would have said, what? How am I supposed to do that, God? How am I supposed to divide the water? What do you mean that's impossible? I've come to you because we cannot pass through the sea. Maybe they couldn't swim. I also know that if I swim for about 5 minutes, I'm tired. I'm not swimming over with all of my possessions to the other side. But notice that Moses doesn't question God. God says to Moses, lift your staff, stretch out your hand, divide the water. Now what a show and take of faith that must have been for Moses. The Israelites are standing there getting angry with him, and yet he does what looks ridiculous, and the impossible happens. Today we don't worship a God who is far away. Instead, we worship a God who invites us to join in with his rescue plan for the world. You know, God didn't need Moses to raise his hand in order to divide the sea. It wasn't Moses' power. But God wanted Moses to make a public declaration that he trusted that God was going to do something before anyone else knew what was going to happen. Lift your staff, stretch out your hand, divide the waters. Today, God still invites all of us to stretch out our hands, to live in faith. I was laughing with Jeffrey and Carol before the service this morning because some of you know you were in touch with me. The weather for this morning, we're supposed to be in the middle of a thunderstorm right now. There was some people texted to say, Amy, what are we going to do about the thunderstorm when it comes? Even this morning, Carol and I were texting saying, oh, if it rains, maybe we could do the service from the garage. And I remember, and God just said to me so powerfully this morning, are you really going to stand up in front of people and tell people they got to live by faith and be making plans about what to do about this thunderstorm? Amy, do you trust that this word is true or not? I came out of the house this morning at 9 o'clock to start setting things up. It was still raining. I had my rain jacket on. I thought, this is crazy. God, are you sure this is how we're doing service this morning? He said to me, lift up your staff, pick up the music box, take your coat off and get ready for church outside this morning. God says to all of us, lift up your staff, stretch out your hands, practice what you preach and start living by faith. It might look impossible. It was pouring this morning at 8 o'clock. But God said we're having church outside and here we are, dry, ready to worship and praise. 2 hours ago it looked ridiculous that we would be here having church outside, but God tells us to live by faith. Don't see the way that everyone else sees it. Trust in me. Stretch out your hands, divide the water, Moses. Today for all of us, what does it mean to live by faith? To trust in the God who says, go, and I will be with you. For all of us today, who are we people that God is putting in place to answer other people's prayers? You know, God doesn't need us to bring salvation to the world, but he asks us to join in. Who can we encourage? Who can we invite along to church? Who can we share a message with? Who can we pray for? Who can we practically walk with and support at this time? God didn't need Moses to divide the sea, but he wanted Moses to join in. What does God want us to join in with this morning? God calls us to trust our battles to him, to rest and wait on him, but he calls us to join in, that we might be used by God to bring freedom to others. In the midst of challenges, look up. When we don't know how to keep going, trust in the one who does the impossible, the God who fights for you. Rest in him. But also let's stretch our hands and believe that the God who calls is faithful. The challenge that you face is small in comparison to the God you serve. There's nothing too big or impossible for him. We'll sing in a moment, our God is a great big God and he holds us in his hands. Are we ready to trust him and live by faith this morning? Because the Red Sea parts. The Israelites walk through on dry land. The impossible becomes possible and freedom from Egypt is known. The God who promised deliverance is faithful. So today will we trust him with our battles? Will we give him our sorrows and our burdens and our cares? And will we believe today that hope and freedom is possible? Keep trusting. Stand firm. Stretch out your hands, for God is still working his purposes out. How will we respond to his love and faithfulness this morning?